He opened the door for a woman and 3 kids he'd never met. And somewhere between the silence, the soup, and the smell of smoke, he remembered how to love again. If stories like this stay with you long after the screen goes dark, hit the like button and subscribe. There's more where this came from. Quiet stories that heal, not shout. Montana, late October. First snow in the air, but the sky still raining. Clay never left the porch light on. But that night a storm moved in early. Not just the kind that soaked the roads and shivered the windows, but the kind that made a man reach for memory before reaching for sleep. Inside his workshop, warm lamplight spilled over the worn grain of a half-fixed table. He'd been sanding one of the legs and the back right, which had cracked clean through 3 winters ago. He wasn't repairing it for anyone, just for the doing, for the rhythm, for the silence. He didn't hear the knock at first. It came, again, soft, then sharper, not urgent, just trying, like a whisper asking permission. Clay wiped his hands on an old rag, stood and hesitated. The kind of hesitation that wasn't about fear, but about ghosts, the ones you try not to resurrect with small acts of kindness. When he opened the door, the cold punched his ribs. She was standing in the rain, soaked, her coat too thin, her hair clinging to her neck. In her arms, a little girl slept or maybe fainted. Clay couldn't tell. Behind her stood 2 more children, maybe 5 and 7, clinging to the hem of her jeans. She didn't speak at first. The wind howled behind her. She looked up at him, and it wasn't desperation in her eyes, not exactly. It was something deeper, a kind of pride bruised and breaking. "We don't need money," she said, her voice barely carried above the rain. "Just somewhere dry. For the night." Clay blinked. No one had come to his door in nearly 2 years. Not since the funeral. Not since the town learned to leave him alone. He liked it that way. Liked not being asked. Liked that no one expected him to say yes anymore. But the girl in her arms let out a cough, a raw, brittle sound, and Clay's fingers moved before his brain could stop them. He opened the door a little wider. The woman stepped, inside without speaking. The kids followed. Wet shoes squeaked on the old floorboards. Clay said nothing. Just walked ahead of them, slow and steady, leading them toward the back room where a wood stove waited. He struck a match. Fire caught. The room began to breathe. "I'll clean up after them," she said quickly. "They won't touch anything." Clay glanced at her. "Kitchen's that way," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "There's a kettle on the stove." She nodded. "Thank you." He almost told her not to thank him. He didn't want gratitude. He didn't want to care. Instead, he turned and walked away. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, listening. The soft clatter of mugs, the scrape of a chair being pushed out, the quiet murmur of a mother calming her children. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, a flicker of memory. Another woman, another little girl, a bowl of soup and a song being hummed by the kitchen window. He gripped the wall to steady himself. The kids fell asleep fast, wrapped in old quilts from the hall closet. The youngest, the girl she carried, had a fever. Clay found a bottle of children's aspirin in the medicine drawer. He set it on the kitchen table without a word. The woman, Lena, she told him, only when he asked, took it with a quiet, "Thank you," then said nothing more. They sat in the same room for a while after the kids fell asleep. She on the floor near the fire, her hands around a chipped mug. Him across the room, arms crossed. Not watching her. Not really. But he saw the way. Her shoulders drooped, the way her fingers trembled. She wasn't just tired. She was spent. Hollowed out like someone who'd carried too much. Too long. He knew the look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. Finally, she whispered, "We'll be gone by morning." Clay didn't answer, because he didn't know if he wanted that to be true. He lay awake for hours after she slept. The rain tapped the roof in rhythms that reminded him of lullabies. In the other room, one of the kids whimpered in a dream. then quieted. He watched the ceiling, thought about the table he hadn't finished fixing, thought about how easily silence becomes armor, thought about the fire and how warm it was, and too warm, maybe, after so many cold nights. Just before dawn, he got up, pulled an extra blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed, walked softly into the back room and laid it over the sleeping woman and the little girl curled up in her arms. Then he turned back toward the workshop, sat down at the table. The cracked leg was still there, waiting. He ran his hand over the grain, felt the scar where the wood had split. No piece of wood forgets being broken, but that doesn't mean it can't be part of something solid again. He reached for his chisel, and for the first time in 4 years, Clay didn't fix the table to forget. He fixed it because they might need somewhere to eat breakfast. Clay didn't sleep much that night. The wind had quieted, but his thoughts hadn't. He listened to the soft creak of the floorboards as one of the children stirred, the low ticking of the stove cooling down, the hush of someone else's breathing just down the hall, not imagined, this time. Not a memory. A stranger was sleeping under his roof. When morning came, the light filtered in gray through the kitchen window. Clay stood at the sink, staring out toward the tree line beyond the old shed. The kind of gray that sits, heavy on the shoulders. November gray. Behind him, a chair scraped softly. He didn't turn. "You didn't have to make coffee," Lena said, voice rough with sleep. "I didn't," Clay replied. "That was yesterday's." She gave a half smile, barely there, and sat. Her eyes were red. The kind of red that came from more than just sleep deprivation, but she didn't complain. "I'll clean the kitchen before we go," she said after a pause, "and the floors." He finally turned, leaning against the counter. "They can stay a while. Till the weather clears." She looked up at him, surprised. Her fingers curled around the chipped mug he'd set out. "You sure?" Clay gave a short nod. "I'm not going to throw kids into a snowstorm." The way she looked at him after that, not thankful, not emotional, just steady, as if she'd spent enough years reading men's intentions to know when something was real, or when it wasn't. "They're good kids," she murmured, "just tired." He didn't respond, just picked up a piece of toast, bit into it, and watched the frost form on the window. By noon, the kids had begun to settle. The boy, maybe 6, had discovered Clay's hammer collection. The oldest girl read quietly in the corner. The youngest, still feverish, lay curled under a blanket on the sofa. Clay kept to the edges, in his workshop mostly, pretending to busy himself. But every laugh, every cough, every tiny pair of feet running across the boards pulled at something in him. He hated it. He hated how loud silence felt when they weren't there, and he hated even more how natural it already felt to hear them. That night, he stood by the door of the guest room, old storage now cleared out, and watched as Lena tucked in her children. "Do they miss him?" he asked suddenly, surprised even himself. She paused, hand resting on the little girl's hair. "They miss the idea of him," she said. "Not the man he became." He nodded once. That was enough truth for one night. He dreamt of fire again, of wood splitting, of the scream that never finished. He woke up soaked in sweat. The house was quiet, but it felt different, like someone had drawn breath into it again. Like the walls remembered warmth. He didn't know what to do with that. The next morning, Lena was already in the kitchen when he came down. The table was clean, the dishes washed. She was fixing eggs. "You didn't have to," he began. "No," she said gently. "But I needed to do something." He hesitated, sat. The chair creaked under his weight, or maybe under the years. "I don't know how long we'll stay," she added after a moment. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Clay didn't look at her. "I'm not offering a permanent solution," he said more defensively than he meant to. "I don't know what this is, or what it's turning into." "It's just breakfast," Lena said. "Nothing more. But there was something in her tone, quiet, careful, that said she understood. She wasn't asking for a rescue, only a pause, only a place to breathe. He respected that. Later, when the kids played in the back lot, Clay watched them through the window. They had found an old tire swing. Their laughter floated up into the air, crisp, cold, clean. It didn't belong here. Not in this house, not in this life he'd barricaded so carefully. But maybe it did. Maybe that's what scared him most. He stepped outside, picked up a few pieces of scrap wood, measured, sawed, nailed, mechanically, with muscle memory more than will. A new bench by the fire pit, the kind of thing he never made anymore. Lena came out with 2 cups of coffee. "For me?" he asked. "For you," she said. "And for the version of you who doesn't know how to sit down." He smiled despite himself. For a moment, they stood in silence. The wind shifted. The sun tried, weakly, to break through the clouds. "I'm not good at this," Clay said. "Me neither." She handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed. Just once. Enough to feel real. And in that fleeting touch, in that unremarkable moment, Clay felt something settle. Not peace. Not trust. But a beginning. A stranger under his roof. And maybe, if he let her stay just a little longer, not a stranger at all. The days came colder after that. Snow flirted with the rooftops, flirting, then vanishing again. Like winter teasing the town before settling in for good. The light thinned. The air grew sharper, the kind of cold that made wood moan. And houses remember their age. But inside Clay's house something was shifting, not loudly, not quickly, but steadily, like the way frost gives way to warmth when the fire's been burning long enough. Lena started making tea in the mornings. She didn't ask permission, just found where he kept the old chipped kettle, wiped it clean, and brewed weak chamomile while the kids still slept. At first, Clay didn't say much, but each morning he found himself showing up in the kitchen just as the kettle whistled, like clockwork. No small talk, just 2 people who understood the comfort of silence. The children, too, had fallen into rhythm. The oldest girl, Ava, helped fold laundry without being asked. The middle one, Ben, started calling Clay sir and following him around the shop like a curious shadow. The youngest, June, had shaken her fever, but still clung to her mother like she might disappear. Clay let them be. But each night after the dishes were washed and the fire dulled to coals, he found himself returning to the workshop, not to escape, but to anchor himself, to remember who he was before they arrived, or maybe to remember who he used to be before the fire took it all away. One evening, he pulled the old table back to the center of the room, the same table he'd started, fixing before Lena knocked on his door. It was solid oak, heavy as grief, the kind of wood that didn't give up easy. 3 legs were good. The 4th had been fractured at the joint, not clean but deep. He sat for a long time just running his hand over the split. Some breaks could be glued, others needed new pieces cut. And sometimes, the most honest thing you could do was leave. The scar showing, not to hide it but to remember that it held. A shadow moved behind him. "You always fix things at night?" Lena asked gently. Clay turned. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a faded cardigan he hadn't seen in years. One of his wife's. He didn't mention it. "It's quieter," he said. She nodded, stepped inside. Her eyes settled on the table. "You fixing that for someone?" "No." A pause. "Then why keep it?" He looked at her, not sharply, just for a beat longer than he usually allowed. "Because it's still worth something." That made her go quiet. She stepped closer, brushed her fingers along the edge of the table, right where the burn mark was, a faint black crescent from some old accident. She didn't ask about it. "I used to have a table like this," she said softly. "Back when... before." Clay waited, but she didn't say more. The next morning, Clay let Ben hold the hammer. He stood behind the boy, guided his hands, showed him how to line up a nail. It was a simple thing. But when the boy turned and smiled, gap-toothed, proud, Clay felt something lurch in his chest. He hadn't taught anyone anything since his daughter. Later, Ava helped Lena sweep out the front porch. They were humming something, out of tune, in sync. June fell asleep with her head on Clay's shoulder without warning, and he froze at first, unsure of what to do. He didn't move for 20 minutes. That night, Lena came into the workshop again. This time she brought 2 mugs of tea, sat across from him without invitation. "Your wife," she said quietly. "What was she like?" Clay looked up. He didn't flinch. "She laughed a lot," he said. "Not loud, just like she knew something nobody else did." Lena nodded, sipped her tea. "Did it hurt to talk about her?" she asked. "Yes." Another pause. "But not as much as forgetting does." She didn't speak for a while. When she did, her voice was barely above the hum of the night outside. "I keep wondering if I've already had the best parts of my life," she said. "And now I'm just surviving what's left." Clay didn't respond right away. But after a long silence, he looked at her, really looked, and said, "I used to think that too." She blinked. "And now?" "I'm still deciding." They didn't say much after that. But when Lena left the workshop that night, Clay stayed. He sanded the table smoother, reinforced the broken leg, and for the first time reached into the back shelf for the wood stain he hadn't touched in 4 years. The color was called Hickory Dawn. A new beginning, maybe, or at least something that held. The wind changed that week. It came down harder off the mountain, sharper, drier, a signal that true winter was near. The kind of wind that cracked the earth's skin and made the air hum through broken window panes. Clay stayed busy with repairs, though nothing was broken badly enough to need fixing. Sometimes it was easier to sand wood than to sit with your own silence. He noticed Lena folding the same pile of laundry twice. She scrubbed an already clean pan. He didn't ask why. But he knew the signs. Some restlessness couldn't be walked off. One evening, Clay found June drawing with a dull pencil on the back of an old blueprint. She had sketched a crooked house with 6 stick figures inside. One of them was holding a hammer. "Is that me?" he asked. She nodded, thumb in her mouth. He tried to smile, but something caught in his throat. He left the drawing on the table. That night, Lena came into the shop later than usual. Her face was pale under the lamplight, her hands clenched in the sleeves of her sweater. Clay looked up from the leg of a stool he was reshaping. "I'm sorry," she said abruptly, "for staying this long." He set the chisel down. "You haven't overstayed. But I haven't earned it either." He didn't know how to answer that. He watched her shift her weight, unsure whether to sit or bolt. Eventually, she stood, beside the workbench, eyes on the floor. "There's something I should tell you," she said. Clay waited, let her speak when she was ready. "My ex, he's not just angry, he's dangerous, controlling, the kind of man who doesn't take no, without a bruise." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I left once before, came back, told myself it was safer for the kids, that maybe if I stayed he wouldn't." She trailed off. Didn't need to finish. Clay swallowed. She stepped back, away from the bench, as if giving him room to walk away. "I won't bring trouble to your doorstep," she said, almost whispering now. "If you want us gone tomorrow, we'll go." He didn't move. Instead, he reached for a piece of cloth on the bench, an old rag, and unfolded it slowly. Inside was a thin piece of wood, hand-carved, stained dark. A keepsake. A toy horse. "My daughter loved horses," he said. "That one I made for her the week before she died." Lena said nothing. She and her mom were driving back from the coast. Black ice hit them hard. No chance to swerve. He spoke plainly, not for sympathy. "They were gone before I got there." The wind outside pressed hard against the window panes, as if leaning in to listen. "I stopped talking to people after that," he added. "Didn't trust them. Didn't trust myself either. Grief does that. It rearranges what you think you deserve. Lena's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Clay looked at her, this woman carrying her own ruins, and felt something both familiar and unbearable. We're not broken in ways that disqualify us, he said. Just in ways that make us cautious. Later that night, he found her in the kitchen, pouring hot water into mugs for tea. Chamomile? He asked. Only kind I found in your cabinets. He nodded. Sat down across from her. They sipped in quiet, warmth rising between them in soft spirals. I'm not asking you to fix anything, she said suddenly. I'm not offering to. But thank you for not making me feel like I'm wrong for still being afraid. Clay's fingers brushed the rim of his mug. Fear's not a flaw, he said. It just means you've been awake long enough to know the cost. She smiled, a small, tired, real smile. Then her gaze drifted to the window, to the dark beyond it. If he comes looking, she said quietly, I won't run again. But I might need help standing. Clay didn't hesitate. I'll stand with you. The shop that night felt warmer, not from the stove, but from something less visible, the kind of heat that comes when someone finally shares the weight they've been carrying and finds it halved. Clay went back to the table. He ran his hand across the finished edge, smooth and dark from the new stain. He didn't see a broken leg anymore. He saw a table that had survived fire, years of dust and neglect, and still stood steady. And for the first time in a long while, Clay thought maybe he could too. The storm never came. Not the one in Clay's mind, nor the one that usually rolled down off the mountains by late November. Instead, the days grew soft. Cold, yes, but manageable. Dry snow dusted the earth like powdered sugar, and the sky held that winter blue that only comes after grief has had its say. They stayed, and he let them. Clay didn't remember giving permission, not aloud at least, but one morning, he found Lena's toothbrush on the bathroom sink, a pair of Ava's socks on the back porch rail, June's crayon drawings clipped to the fridge with an old magnet shaped like a fish. He hadn't put the drawings there. That meant someone thought the space was theirs too. That morning, Lena brought him coffee, not tea, in his favorite, chipped mug. No small talk, just a quick brush of fingers as she passed the cup. The kitchen smelled like bread. The kids were still asleep. For the first time in 4 years, the house felt full without feeling loud. I can cook dinner tonight, Lena said. Clay raised an eyebrow. You already do. I mean real dinner, she replied, grinning, like sit-down dinner with a table and everything. He didn't answer right away, but later, in the shop, he wiped down the table again, polished it, carved 3 new chairs from scrap pine. He didn't tell her. That evening they ate together, all 6 of them. The fire crackled. Lena served chicken and potatoes. Ava set the table. Ben made a mess of his napkin, and June insisted on saying grace, even if no one had before. For warm things and second chances, she whispered. Amen. Clay stared at his plate, his throat tight. No one had ever thanked God for his table before. After dinner, Ben dragged out a battered guitar Clay hadn't touched in years. 2 strings were missing and the tuning was shot, but the boy strummed it proudly. Lena laughed, really laughed, the sound cutting clean through the walls Clay had built. He looked at her from across the room. She wore a sweater too big, her hair loose, her face a little flushed from the firelight. He couldn't remember the last time a woman had looked comfortable in his space, like it belonged to her too. And maybe, in some new way, it did. Later that night, Clay stood at the window and watched snow fall in fine, feathery sheets. He heard the clink of mugs in the kitchen, Lena humming as she cleaned up. Then her voice behind him. You okay? He didn't turn. Not used to this much noise. You want us to leave? No. She stepped beside him. You sure? He looked at her, eyes tired but kind. I think I've had enough quiet to last me a lifetime. A beat passed between them. She leaned against the wall. Clay could smell the cinnamon on her skin from the tea she just poured. "Do you think this is real?" she asked. "What? This calm." Clay took a long breath. "I think it's earned," she nodded. "Even if it's temporary? Especially if it is." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something a man says when he's trying not to hope." Clay chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's what you say when you know what hope costs." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but a kind of permission to want. That night, Clay found himself wide awake in bed, listening. Lena's laughter still echoed faintly in the walls. June had left her stuffed rabbit on the stairs. The table still held the crumbs of dinner. His boots sat by the door, next to a smaller pair of shoes, mismatched, worn, but side by side. Sound of home wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting or cheering. It was the soft thud of bare feet on floorboards, the clink of silverware, the creak of a chair, the sigh of someone finally exhaling after holding their breath too long. And in that stillness, Clay realized something. He was no longer waiting for them to leave. He was waiting to see if they'd stay. It started with a sound Clay hadn't heard in months, the crunch of unfamiliar tires on gravel. He was in the workshop, sanding down the edge of a small shelf for Ben's books, when the sound stilled him. Too slow for a delivery truck, too heavy for a neighbor's pickup. Then came the second sound. Lena's voice from the porch, not shouting, just stopped, mid-sentence, like air cut short. He stepped outside. A black SUV idled at the end of the drive. The kind of car that looked too new, too clean for this part of Montana. Behind the wheel sat a man in a leather jacket, his arm resting casually on the door, eyes shielded by expensive sunglasses that didn't belong in winter light. Clay didn't need to ask who he was. The man stepped out, smiled like someone who'd never been told no. "Lena," he said, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. "You've been hard to find." Lena didn't answer. June clung to her leg, face buried in her coat. Ava stepped protectively in front of Ben. The man's gaze swept to Clay. "You him?" he asked casually, like they were trading tools. Clay didn't respond. "I'm her husband," the man continued. "The legal kind." Clay's jaw tightened. He moved to stand between Lena and the SUV. "You need to leave." The man smiled wider. "That's not how this works." "Yeah," Clay said. "It is here." He didn't call the sheriff that night. Not yet. Lena sat at the kitchen table, her face unreadable. The kids were upstairs, too quiet for bedtime. "I should have told you he might come," she said. "I figured he might." She nodded. "He's not someone who lets go." Clay crossed his arms. "You're safe here." That's what I told myself last time. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Full of fear, shame, old wounds still bleeding under thick skin. Clay sat across from her. "You don't have to run this time." She looked up at him. "You sure about that?" He didn't answer with words. He just reached across the table, his calloused fingers brushing hers. "I've got room to stand," he said. "If you need it." But Clay knew the kind of man who showed up like that. He'd met men like him in his younger days, charm on the surface, rot underneath. He knew what it meant when a man smiled too easily while taking everything that wasn't his, so he prepared. He reinforced the door frames, moved tools closer to the house, talked to the sheriff, casually for now, about a car that didn't belong. The sheriff nodded slowly, said he'd keep an eye out, which in small-town terms meant more than it sounded. Still, Clay didn't sleep much. Every branch tapping against the window felt like a footstep. Every car engine in the distance made his shoulders stiffen. Lena tried to hide it, but he saw the way her eyes darted to the window, the way she locked the door twice, the way she hugged the kids a little longer at night. Peace wasn't peace when you knew it could end with a knock. A week passed. Then, one afternoon, Clay returned from the hardware store and found the front gate wide open. His heart dropped into his stomach. He rushed inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He found them all in the back room, the kids curled up under a blanket, Lena sitting upright, pale as snow. On the table sat a white envelope. No name. No message. Inside, 3 photos. One of Clay, one of Lena and the kids at the market, one of the house. Clay didn't say anything, just burned them in the fireplace. But the air in the house had changed. The warmth, still there, but thinner, now. Like the fire was burning against the wind. That night, Lena stood at the window, arms crossed tight. "I should leave," she said. "Before this gets worse." Clay stood beside her. "Leaving doesn't make it stop. It might keep you safe." "I don't want safe if it means empty." She turned to him then, really turned, eyes glassy, lips trembling. "What? If I bring destruction everywhere I go?" Clay shook his head. "No," he said. "You brought life back into this place. Into me." She blinked, stunned. "I thought I'd forgotten how to love anyone," Clay said, quieter now. "But I remembered, the second you lit that stove, the second you dried their shoes." Lena closed her eyes. "I don't need a perfect life," he added. "I just want a chance to fight for a real one." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You'd fight for us?" Clay stepped closer. "If I have to pay for this with blood or fire," he said, "I'll still choose you. I'll still choose them. Every time." The wind howled through the trees that night. The house held its breath. And deep in Clay's bones, something told him the fire was coming. The wind died at dusk. It had howled for days, a restless thing clawing at the roof, and then, just like that, it stopped. The stillness felt wrong, too still, like breath being held before something breaks. Clay noticed it first in the way the air smelled, too sharp, too dry, carrying the faintest trace of gasoline. He stood on the porch, hammer still in hand from a day of fixing loose floorboards, and scanned the horizon. The sky had dimmed early, clouds thick and low. He couldn't see the tree line. Behind him, Lena called the kids in for dinner. He turned. He almost smiled. Then he saw it just over the hill behind the workshop. A flicker, then another, then flame. He didn't shout, didn't panic. He moved. By the time Lena smelled it, by the time she turned to the window and saw the glow, Clay was already halfway to the workshop, feet pounding snow-matted grass, breath white and rising. The fire was climbing fast, too fast for something accidental. He kicked open the back door to the shop. The heat hit like a wall. Orange light danced along the walls, eating through shelves, devouring the sawdust that clung to every surface like dry tinder. Sparks rained from the rafters. His table, the one he'd restored piece by piece, was catching. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the first extinguisher, pulled the pin, aimed for the base, but it was no use. The fire had a voice now. A roar that laughed at resistance. A scream tore through the air, not from the fire, from the house. "Lena." He ran. Smoke trailed him. The front of the house glowed with reflection now, flickers playing across the windows. He burst through the door, lungs burning, and found Lena dragging June into the hallway, Ava close behind, Ben still frozen on the stairs. Clay moved on instinct, grabbed the boy, tossed him over his shoulder, and shouted, "Out, go!" Lena didn't argue. She scooped the girls and pushed open the back door. The heat followed them. Clay stumbled outside, barely breathing, the weight of Ben heavy in his arms. The boy clung to him, silent with shock. Behind them, flames licked the side of the house, jumping. From the shop to the eaves, they reached the edge of the clearing. Clay turned. The workshop was gone. The side wall collapsed inward, a rush of sparks exploding skyward like a dying star. The heat was unbearable now, even at a distance, and that's when he saw him, across the field, silhouetted by fire, the man in the leather jacket, watching, just watching. Clay didn't shout. didn't chase. He knew better than to leave his people. He turned his back to the flames and wrapped his arms around Lena and the kids. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice shaking. "Yeah. You're bleeding. I'm okay." She pressed her forehead to his chest. "I thought you were still in there." Clay didn't answer. He was too busy holding on, too busy breathing in the proof that they were all still alive. The fire department came. The sheriff came. The man was gone. Lena gave a statement. Clay stood beside her, hand resting on June's shoulder. The girl hadn't spoken a word since the flames had started. She just held her stuffed rabbit tighter, the edges singed from where she grabbed it on the way out. The sheriff put a hand on Clay's back. "We'll find him." Clay nodded. He already lost. The sheriff looked at him. "You sure?" Clay's eyes didn't leave his family. "He tried to burn us down, but we're still standing." They stayed in a neighbor's guest house that night. The fire had spared the house, and mostly. Some damage to the siding, smoke in the attic, but the shop was gone. Everything in it, tools, projects, wood, ash now, except the table. Somehow, impossibly, the table survived, charred around the edges, one leg scorched to black. But standing. Lena found it in the morning, out back, where the firefighters had tossed it aside. She brought Clay to it, quietly. He knelt, ran his hand along the edge. It was still warm, still strong, still there, just like them. That night, in the borrowed room with two thin walls and mismatched quilts, Lena stood by the window and whispered, "You saved them." Clay shook his head. "I didn't think. I just moved." "That's what saving is." He looked at her. The firelight was gone from her face now, but something else remained. Something softer, stronger. "I thought I was done being brave," he admitted. She stepped closer. "You were never done, just waiting for the right reason." Clay looked at her, really looked. "If I had to do it again," he said, "if I had to walk into the fire for you, I'd do it every time." She didn't speak, just touched his face, held it there, and finally, after everything burned, they let themselves feel what hadn't been destroyed. The smoke clung to everything, to their clothes, their skin, the backs of their throats. Even in the neighbor's guest house where the beds were clean, and the tea was hot, Lena could still smell it, like a ghost that hadn't decided to leave yet. Clay didn't say much those first few days. He moved slowly, like someone trying not to disturb something broken inside himself. His hands were blistered, bandaged. He flinched when he slept. The kids stayed close to Lena, especially June, who wouldn't let go of her stuffed rabbit even when it left smudges of soot on the blankets. The house had been spared. Mostly, the siding was scorched and the attic reeked of smoke, but the firefighters had done their work. The damage was visible, yes, but not fatal. The shop, though, was gone, burned to the dirt. Clay visited it alone on the third morning, just after sunrise when the frost still glittered on the blackened wreckage. He stood in the silence and tried to remember what had been where. The smell of cedar, the squeak of his old workbench, the tools arranged just so, all gone. But the table had survived. He found it lying on its side near the fence, smoke-kissed and battered, but somehow still whole. He picked it up with his injured hands, slowly, painfully, and carried it back toward the house. That night, Lena found him, sitting in the backyard. The table was beside him, upright but scorched like a war survivor who refused to fall. "You should be resting," she said. Clay didn't look up. "I can't sleep in someone else's bed." She sat beside him on the porch step, wrapped in a quilt. "I keep thinking it'll hit me," she said. "The weight of what almost happened." "It will," he said. "It just doesn't knock all at once." She nodded. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in the hush of cold air and the soft creak of wood cooling around them. "I was ready to leave," she whispered. "When I saw the flames, I thought, this is it. This is what I bring to people. Fire, loss." Clay turned to her. "No, he said. That man brought the fire. You brought something worth saving. She looked down at her hands. And what about you? What did you bring? He hesitated, then reached out gently, resting his palm over hers. I brought a match once, he said. 4 years ago, when I gave up, walked away from everything and let it rot. She didn't speak. But you, he continued. You showed up in the rain with nothing but a wet coat and 4 reasons to try again. That wasn't fire. That was light. Lena swallowed, eyes wet. You still think we have a chance? I don't know, he said honestly. But I'd rather try here, in the ashes, than go back to being cold and untouched. The next day, the sheriff stopped by. They'd found the SUV burned out on an old trail road, abandoned, no sign of the man. But he'd be looking over his shoulder now, the sheriff said. That kind of coward never came back once people stood up. Clay thanked him, then closed the door and stood in the kitchen, breathing deep. The air smelled like cinnamon, and wood smoke, and bread. Home. Neighbors began to appear. Someone dropped off a bag of tools, rusty, but usable. The hardware store owner offered lumber. Mrs. Rowley from down the lane brought soup and fresh biscuits and a quiet look that said, I've been alone too, I understand. Ben helped Clay clear the debris. Ava swept the porch like it was a sacred task. June drew pictures again, this time of a house with flowers in the yard and 6 smiling faces. Lena found an old seed packet in the pantry. Promise Tree, it said on the label, a local nickname for a hardy mountain ash that survived poor soil and harsh winters. She planted it just beyond the porch steps, where the grass still grew through ash. Clay didn't say anything when she did, just knelt beside her, resting his hand in the dirt. That night, as they all sat around the singed table, now cleaned, legs repaired, burn marks still visible, Clay looked at each of them. The kids, Lena, the candle flickering in the center. He raised his mug. Not wine, just warm cider. To what's left, he said. And to what's next. No one said anything grand. They didn't need to. June climbed into his lap without a word. Ava leaned against her mother's shoulder. Ben stared at the table, then ran his finger gently over a blackened scar in the wood. It's still strong, he said. Clay met Lena's eyes. So are we, he said. And for the first time since the fire, she smiled with her whole face. Winter loosened its grip, one soft breath at a time. The snow stopped falling. The sun lingered a little longer in the afternoons. Ice melted from the eaves of the house and birds returned to the bare trees, tentative but hopeful. And on a Tuesday morning in March, the first board of the new workshop was laid. Not by Clay, but by the people he'd tried for years to keep out. It started with Frank Dillard, the retired mechanic from down the road, showing up with 2x4s in the bed of his truck. You're not rebuilding alone, he said, as if Clay had asked. That's not how we do things here. Next came Edna from the bakery, with a crate of muffins and a roll of blueprints her late husband had drawn for a remodel they never built. This town's better with that shop standing, she said. You too, for that matter. By noon there were 7 trucks in the yard and more hammering than the valley had heard in years. Clay stood with a nail gun in one hand, frozen in place for a beat. Lena came up behind him. They're not here for the building, she whispered. They're here for you. He blinked once, then got to work. It took 3 weeks, long days, sore backs, calloused hands. Ben carried nails in a coffee tin. Ava learned to measure twice before cutting once. June decorated every plank with chalk drawings before it was hammered into place. Lena packed lunches, bandaged splinters, and kept the coffee hot. And Clay, for the first time since the fire, since the funeral, since everything, laughed. Not often, not loudly, but real. The sound startled him the first time. He looked around like it had come from someone else. Lena smiled without saying a word. They built more than the shop. They rebuilt rhythm. On Sunday mornings, Lena started making pancakes. June insisted on music breakfasts, where Clay would play an old blues record while flipping bacon. Ava volunteered to read to the kids at the library. Ben decided he wanted to build his own birdhouse. One evening, Clay found him measuring wood in the shop. "You planning to live here now?" Clay teased. Ben looked up. "Can I?" Clay didn't know how to answer, so he just nodded. The new shop was taller, brighter, better insulated, but it kept the same bones, the same window facing the woods, the same corner where his wife's photo still hung, and in the center of the space, Clay placed the old table, scorched, scarred, solid. It didn't match anything, but it didn't have to. Lena ran her hand over its surface one afternoon, fingers pausing on the burn marks. "We should sand it down," she said. "Make it smooth again." Clay shook his head. "I want the scars to show." "Why?" He looked at her. Quiet, unblinking. "Because they mean it survived." They held a dinner that night. Not a celebration. Clay couldn't stomach the idea of throwing parties, but something simpler. Just the people who had helped, who had shown up. Neighbors brought dishes, casseroles, cornbread, pies. The workshop smelled like sugar and smoke and cedar. Children ran through sawdust. Laughter echoed against the beams. Clay stood near the door, hands in his pockets. Lena appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of cider. "You built this," she said. "No," Clay replied. "We did." She nudged his shoulder with hers. "That's the first time you said we without flinching. I've been practicing." When the guests were gone and the tools put away, Clay lit a small lantern and set it in the center of the table. He stood with Lena beside him. The kids had fallen asleep upstairs. The air smelled like apple and pine. They didn't speak. Not right away. But Lena reached for his hand under the table, and Clay, without hesitation, laced his fingers with hers. Outside, the little promise tree leaned into the breeze. It was taller now, still small, still fragile, but growing. And for the first time in years, Clay wasn't just grateful. He was hopeful. A year passed. Not quickly. Not easily, but gently. In the way a river smooths stone, not by force, but by returning again and again. Spring came, and with it, color. Green pushed through the cracks in the porch steps. Wildflowers reappeared along the fence line. The little, promise tree outside the house had grown a few more inches, leaning slightly to the east. Clay built a small bench beneath it. Not because it was needed, just because it felt right. Mornings had their rhythm now. Lena always rose first. Coffee brewed before sunrise. Clay followed, slower, stiffer. The pain in his shoulder never fully left after the fire, but steadier. Now, Ava walked the younger kids to school. Ben always forgot his gloves. June always waved goodbye with both hands. And every evening they came back together around the same table. The table Clay had almost thrown out years ago. The one that had survived fire and grief and silence. The one still marked with burns and stains and one carved initial, B for Ben, who had gotten a little too confident with a pocket knife. They didn't replace it. They built everything around it. Clay stood by the window one evening watching Lena rake the garden. Her sleeves pushed up, hair tied back, sun catching the curve of her cheek. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it often. "I didn't just find a family. I became one again." That night, after dinner, June asked him to tell a story. Not one. From a book. One from before. He looked at her, this child who had barely spoken the first week, and cleared his throat. He told them about his old shop, about the table, about how it had once wobbled so badly he almost burned it for firewood. "Why didn't you?" Ben asked. Clay smiled. "Because something told me it wasn't done yet." "Kind of like us," Ava said. Clay nodded. "Exactly like us." Later, when the kids were in bed and the dishes were done, Clay and Lena sat across from each other in the quiet kitchen. The candle on the table burned low. The window fogged with the warmth of the room. Outside, the tree swayed gently in the breeze, thin branches tapping the glass. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Lena asked softly. No, Clay said. I thought I'd die alone, honestly. She didn't laugh, she just reached across the table and took his hand. I think I was ready to disappear, she said. Before you opened that door, they sat like that for a long time. No need to fill the space with more than what was already said. Then quietly, Clay whispered, I don't promise forever. I don't know how. Lena nodded. Her thumb brushed the back of his hand. But, he continued, I choose this. I choose us every single day. A pause. That's enough, she said. That's everything. Outside, the promise tree stood still, leaves quivering in the hush between spring and summer. Inside, the house glowed golden with lamplight, and the soft breathing of children sleeping just down the hall. And in the center of it all, steady, scarred and sacred, stood the table that stayed. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, to feel something real, to remember something soft, or to believe again in second chances, then stay with us. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's keep telling the quiet stories that never really end.